Hello and welcome. I'm Randy Buehler. I'm joined by Hall of Famer Frank Karsten, who, to the surprise of absolutely no one, is playing an Affinity deck this weekend. Welcome, Frank.
Thanks for having me, Randy. It's good to be here.
Now, Affinity has been one of the staples of the modern format pretty much as long as it's been around. What is it that has attracted you to this deck so much? Why is this the well you keep going back to?
I just love the way it plays, like all the mathematics with counting, with Arcbound Ravager, summing up the artifacts for cranial plating. I love the explosive starts as well.
Sure.
And I also have so much experience with it. I've been playing it since the original Mirrodin block, basically.
Sure.
And I think in a format like Modern, experience is so important that you just have to stick with what you know and also what you enjoy, and that's really Affinity for me.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for the sequencing and eking out every last point of damage.
Absolutely.
All right, let's look at the cards. If you haven't seen an Affinity deck before, these are the staples, pretty much no-brainer inclusions, all these cheap creatures, or did a lot of thought go into those for this event?
No, pretty much. These are the basics that pretty much every list has. You need some cheap creatures in order to put on the early pressure, as well as to turn on some of the artifact synergy cards. As for the numbers, like some people have been shaving down on the Mem Knights, going down to say 2 copies or so, but I think that the best draws from Affinity come with the most explosive starts. Just having some additional 0 mana cards really helps with that. So these are all fixed for me. Yep.
Fair enough. Let's look at some more cards. Now, I see Ravager, obviously, Cranial Plating. Those are the real artifact synergy cards that everybody has.
Yep.
4 Steel Overseer, and the one I want to talk to you about, 4 Master of Ethereum is not really where this archetype has been in recent years, anyway.
True. Well, at the last Pro Tour, I also played a lot of Master of Ethereum because I always like the cards.
Sure.
Over the course of the last year, many players had been gravitating towards a lot of Edge Champions in the 3-drop slot. Right now, I don't think...
where are the Edge Champions, Frank? I don't see any Edge Champions.
There are none in the main deck. I have a couple in the side. As Master of Ethereum, always smashes through for a lot of damage. And I always like to maximize on the number. I mean, just attacking with like a Mem Knight and a Volt Scourge is not going to win the game. You need some payoff. So just maximizing on that is something I like with the deck. And I think Master of Ethereum is very well positioned right now. Also because like fewer people will be playing cards like Path to Exile, Abrupt Decay, Colligan's Command, and so on in the new Modern metagame without Twin is what I figured.
Okay. So now, does the presence of the Eldrazi deck actually enough to...
At this Pro Tour, but
turns out there's a lot of it out there.
Yeah, it's certainly a deck, and I actually played against it in round 4.
Oh wow!
Where I did have a Master of Ethereum, which was just great, was huge.
A lot better than Edge Champion.
Yeah, if I would have had an Edge Champion, it would be like a 2/2 for 3 mana, no ability. No. I like. Yep. Yeah. So what you have here is what I would call the sample plotter. It's like, what's for dinner today?
One of everything?
Well, 1, everything. Yeah, basically, a lot of the slots in the Affinity deck were kind of fixed for me. The ones you saw earlier, as well as the mana base. And then you have a couple of flex slots. I certainly knew that I wanted an End Soul artifact, which I felt was good in the metagame that I expected.
Well, let's pause there. What was the metagame you were expecting coming into this PT?
Well, fewer decks with stuff like Path to Exile or Spellskite in the main deck.
Okay.
And Colligan's Command. More like just linear aggro decks like Affinity, like Infect.
So with Twin leaving, you just expected people wouldn't have quite as much of that targeted creature removal and so much Spellskite.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's also pretty good against Burn, also a deck that I expected a lot, because if they tab out, you can make a Volt Scourge, put an End Soul on there, and they have a really hard time beating a 5/5 flying lifelink. Galvanic Blast was also a card I really wanted in my deck for sure. Just a one-off, but it's a sweet interactive card against other Affinity or Infect decks. And I didn't want to leave home without at least some pieces of interaction in my deck.
But do the one-ofs actually matter rather than just picking a target and saying, well, I'll make sure I've got 2 or 3 of these Ensoul artifacts versus the burn deck? Is that...
Sure, but there are lots of constraints you have to keep in mind when building the deck. There are only so many colored spells you can put in, only so many 2-drops you want to have. You want a couple of interactive cards in the deck,
Okay.
and so that leads to some mixing and matching to fill out the numbers I wanted to have.
Fair enough.
And on top of that, well, I kind of have a thing for one-offs because it just makes the games more fun when you draw different cards, keeps the opponents on their feet, and so on. But yeah,
Can't argue with that.
But going back to the Galvanic Blast, it's
Sure.
a card that was super popular. Like some decks even played 4 while Splinter Twin was still legal. That has changed, and it's a card that I see as maybe a bit of a necessary evil if you expect lots of like creature-based combo decks, but not a card I would typically want to have in my opening hand. I just want to maximize on the artifacts. So then the 59th and the 60th card in the deck, which is Thoughtcast and Spellskite, is basically like filling it up a bit, trying to figure out like what I can add, and like some other people that I discussed with, like Thoughtcast and like Spellskite. So I was like, well, I'll just go for that one affinity card, such that I can actually call the deck Affinity,
let me ask you about
and
that
one
then.
Spellskite.
Who does Frank Karsten go to ask about advice on how to build an affinity deck? Doesn't the team just say, hey, Frank, what do we play?
Well, like I tested with Team Cabin Crew, mostly for drafts. But not
and there's a couple Cabin Crew guys on Affinity, but most of the team is on random other things?
Exactly.
Okay.
Not many people were interested in playing the deck initially, so I reached out to some other Affinity Masters that I knew.
So there's an Affinity Master back channel conversation going on?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Who's on that chat?
I started chatting with Pedro Carvalho, who has a modern PT debate with the deck, Alex Mashleton, who has multiple GP debates with the deck, Patrick Dickman, who switched from Splinter Twin to Affinity after the bans, as well as Ule Rode, who has also been playing the deck for a while.
Nice.
And then I made a group like Affinity Aficionados. That seemed like a good name. And we we all agreed on the basic setup of the deck. I think all of us are playing some different last couple of slots, but it was good to share ideas with people who have also a lot of experience with the deck. I think that's really important in Modern. Was a bit as an overlap of our regular testing teams. Okay. And it was nice to see that we all reached similar conclusions.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. I know that the lands, the mana anyway, relatively straightforward. 8 Nexus, 4 Opal, 4 Springleaf Drums. Probably not a whole lot to say here.
No, pretty standard. You want your mana to be artifact-based so that it turns on Arcbound Ravager and Cranial Plating and so on. Yeah.
Keep going. Gotta get some more lands, 1 basic island for Path to Exile, basically.
Yeah, and Ghost Quarter,
And Ghost Quarter, sure. 4 Glimmer Void, 4 Darksteel Citadel.
Pretty standard.
Then if we keep going, we gotta look at the sideboard. Now, here's the Edge Champions you mentioned. They're not good enough for the main deck, but there's still some matchups where Protection from all colors is worth it.
Yes, like the grindy matchups that I mentioned, Abzan, Zoo, and so on.
Ancient Grudge,
gotta match.
Help in the Mirror. Gear per Aether Grid is a fun card that we've seen creeping into these lists for the last year or so.
Yeah, I still wasn't sure whether I wanted to play 1 or 2, but it's pretty good in a mirror match, good against Infect. It can even help against decks with Lingering Souls and Stony Silence, so it does a lot of work. There's so many decks in Modern reliant on 1 toughness creatures that it's a sweet card to have.
And then we get to more of this just sampler platter of one-offs. 1 copy of Stubborn Denial, 1 copy of Thoughtseize.
Well, as I said, I like one-offs. Also with Affinity...
Clearly, it keeps your opponent on their toes, right?
With Affinity, you can never board too much, because then you screw up the artifact synergies.
Sure.
So having lots of one-offs but powerful ones allows you to tweak the deck nicely. I also like to have a mix, both are good against combo decks, but Stubborn Denial is fine against Burn. Thoughtseize I may board in against Stony Silence decks. So it gives me some flexibility while boarding, and I like that.
Nice. Is there any thought, too, that should you make a top 8 scenario where deck lists are public, just having that 1 Stubborn Denial planted in the back of your mind, that's got to mess up an opponent a little bit.
Yeah, I hope this may come into play. But,
I like the smile on your face. All right, let's look at the rest of the sideboard.
One Chalice, that's pretty good against decks like...
6 one-offs.
Of course. I like the one-offs.
It's more fun that way.
The 1 Chalice against decks like Infect, I even can board it in against Tron or Burn decks, especially when they board in Nature's Claim or whatnot, or against random combo decks like Living End. A Gravedigger's Cage against Melira decks or Gorgeous Vengeance decks.
Okay.
Another Spellskite against decks like Infect or Boggles, if people would show up with it. A Dismember. It's a bit worse than cards like Ancient Grudge or Gear per Aether Grid in the matches where you would want it, like Infect or Affinity. But it doesn't need colored mana, and that is the key why I
Got
have it. One card from the new set.
That was the one I was going to ask you about. Seagate Wreckage does seems like you have access to some colorless mana.
Oh, more than enough.
Yeah.
And the card, I didn't feel it was good enough for the main deck because game one I just wanted to be set up to win as quickly as possible.
Oh, okay. But after sideboarding, it's going to be grindy, right?
Yeah,
people are bringing in ways to just blow up all your stuff. So, wow, that's super smart. That makes a lot of sense.
So then I want to have access to this effect. And it can definitely help against cards like Ancient Grudge to just refill. And sometimes you want to like take out the land. Sometimes you even want to board up to 18 lands when you want to keep all the masters plus board in as champions. So I like having the land in the board.
Awesome.
And it's just a sweet card for the grindy matchups to have.
That all makes sense to me. There you go, guys. That is the current state of Affinity Tech. Dr. Frank Karsten and the Affinity aficionados signed sign of approval. That's how people are running Affinity this weekend. There's a lot of it out there in the field. I think it is the most played deck, or maybe tied for it. So we're gonna see a lot of it this weekend. Now you got some insight into how to play it and how to shuffle it up if you want to try it out in Modern. Thanks, guys. Sending it back to the news desk.